Very well, welcome to our final session of the day. I really appreciate you staying on and watching, because I think actually covering some really interesting points, specifically the apprenticeship levy, which I've just been trying to get my head around as well, and how all of that is going. So we're going to hear about that and have a chat afterwards, and then we've got a great final panel who are going to be talking about future skills, what we'll all need to know in the future. We've talked a lot about the gap in current skills, but what are people going to be able to have to do in the future, and how do we anticipate that and train them for it? But let's start off with demystifying the apprenticeship levy. Please welcome, we've got Director of Funding and Programs at the Education and Skills Funding Agency, Keith Smith.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I should just say, you staying to the very end, you're going to get the best bit of the last 2 days, okay? So I'm going to give you all the facts and figures that you'll be able to hopefully take away and use to your advantage. So as I'm going to say, spend sort of 10 minutes or so talking about the apprenticeship levy. And I wanted to start, before I sort of get into the sort of the whys and the hows, to just sort of set a bit of context as to why this is so important. Now, I think listening to some of the sessions today, it's very clear that what you're talking about is how in the industry do you deal with the skills challenges that you've got. Now, for us, across sort of national economic policy, we know skills and productivity is a huge problem for us. We also know skills is a big contributing factor to that productivity gap. And so what you've got up here is what the Chancellor used as really the arguments, the evidence base as to why introduce the apprenticeship levy. What we've seen in recent years is quite a significant decline in what employers have been doing in investing off-the-job training. And there's a correlation between economic performance and the investment that we make in employees in the workplace. So what the apprenticeship levy does is introduce a tax, a levy on all employers across the UK to try to reverse that trend in move away from formal skills and formal skills acquisition. Hence the invention of the apprenticeship levy. Now, why then the leap between the levy and apprenticeships? Well, the most important statistic which you'll see up here is that generally for every £1 that we invest in the apprenticeship, we see an economic return of between £26 and £28. Now, there are many apprentices and apprenticeships that actually provide better returns than many of the degrees that obviously that we fund and deliver through universities. So apprenticeships is really a powerhouse of both economic value and, importantly, for employers like yourselves, a really important tool to make sure you're investing in getting the right type of skills to be able to do that. So we're able to bring those two things together. The levy, as I say, is a UK-wide tax. Every employer pays it, every employer is liable to pay that, regardless of size. What the Chancellor agreed and did put in place was, in essence, against the 0.5% pay bill, we introduced what we call an annual allowance. And this annual allowance, I'm going to give you a quick example of how that works. But in essence, the annual allowance and the way it works is a bit like a personal tax code for you as an employer. And it means, in essence, you don't start paying the levy unless you've got a pay bill, a PAYE liability of over £3 million. Now, of course, the Chancellor, as part of his or her sort of budget process, can move around that fiscal policy. So they can decide to increase the levy rate from 0.5% to raise extra revenue, or they could decide to move that annual allowance, which in essence moves the number of employers in scope for actually paying the levy. So as we stand here today, there's about 20,000 or so employers that actually pay the levy on a day-to-day basis. So for those employers that don't pay the levy, they can still get support to government or public funding, and that's done on the basis of what we call a co-payment basis. So in essence, we say, if you want to take on an apprentice, for every £1 you pay, we'll contribute £9. So in essence, there's a 10% kind of co-investment rate that we actually put towards that. Clearly, if you're an employer paying the levy, you spend the full cost of that on apprenticeship training. So in essence, you're not paying this co-payment unless you want to spend more than the actual amount of levy you pay. So that's some of the background. I'll put it up here. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, so I know it's late in the afternoon, but this gives you really an example of how that annual allowance works. And I know for talking to many businesses and many employers, we get a lot of questions still about why are they paying the levy and are they liable for it? So this really just helps you explain how that actually works. So what we've done in order to try and make all of this work, we've developed, in essence, what we call a new service. And so what we've done it really is taken the old system, thrown it away, and we've said we now want employers, people like you, taking control of the investment that you've got to spend. So in the old days, government used to raise taxation, give it to people like me. We used to distribute it to colleges and training providers, and we'd hope then that they'd come and talk to you as employers and persuade you to do apprenticeships. What we've done from this May is build a new service, which means all levy-paying employers, in paying the levy, go online and create a new digital account. It's in this account that we've built some fancy kind of software connections which interacts directly with your HMRC accounts, your sort of government digital accounts, and we pull through every month the amount of money you're paying into HMRC. And that very simply looks like a balance. I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. So the new service basically lets you as employers see what you're paying day to day. Importantly, it lets you look to how you want to spend that money. So we've given you online capability to pick different apprenticeships and to research different apprenticeships, to be able to pick a training provider and to look at what different providers meet your needs. But importantly, it's putting you in the driving seat. You're paying the levy. We're giving you first call on spending what you're paying. And any money you don't spend, I should say, we then recycle to other employers. So one of the big pushes we're trying to say to all levy-paying employers is, if you don't use it, you will lose it. Okay? So it's really, really important you kind of actually work within your companies to understand how you want to make that investment. So the services importantly help you plan that apprenticeship journey, to make a purchasing decision, to pick the provider, to pick the standard, and importantly, to give us authorization then to pay the training provider on your behalf for the apprentices that you're actually giving authority to go in place. You stay in control of this account all the way through, from beginning to end. So if you're not happy with the experience you're getting from the provider, you can instruct us to stop paying them. So you always feel very much in control of what you're doing. Okay, so that's very much what we've got in terms of the apprenticeship service. What we're also doing in more sort of, just at the current time, we're trying to develop more capability to help apprentices or learners, because we have, as part of the system, a find an apprentice system. And we want to make it easier for you to find people to fill your jobs. So we want to try and match and build services that match people that are looking for jobs, people looking for apprenticeships, with you where you have a vacancy and an employment opportunity. And that's, for us, a really exciting development in the way we want to shape and develop this system going forward. So I thought I'd put up for you just a simple view of what this looks like. So this is what the account looks like. So you can see it looks very much like a bank account. You see the balance that you've got. Underneath, you can see the different transactions in terms of money coming in and out. When you click on any of these things, you can drill right down and it will tell you what the payments going out have been for, the different apprentices, the names, and that type of thing. So again, as employers, we know some want to be really hands-on with this. Others just want to leave it to the training provider or the college to deal with. And again, that's also okay. So that's everything from me. So that's kind of how the system is kind of currently operating. I know we'll have some opportunities for some questions in a moment, so I'll pass over.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're using the apprenticeship levy within Highways England. But can you raise your hands if you're an employer that's paying the levy? Oh, brilliant. And the next question, and perhaps you can shout out, do you think you're going to use all your levy payment in the first year? No? Okay. Well, hopefully I've got some tips this afternoon on what we're doing within Highways England to try and spend as much of our levy commitment as possible. Keith just gave us an overview of how the levy works and how employers have signed up to their digital accounts and an overview there of what that looks like. Some research that was done recently, and also the Chamber of Commerce have released some research today to say that only a third of employee levy payers have actually signed up to the levy. This could be because just over a third are finding it difficult to navigate. And I think everybody in the room plays a part in supporting other employers to understand how we use this money to its greatest effect. We've talked a lot today about the skills gaps, and the apprenticeship levy is a real opportunity to support some of those. I'm the Vice Chair of the East Midlands Apprenticeship Ambassador Network, and the conference has given me an opportunity to meet some of the employers that are paying the levy that haven't yet signed up, and make sure that I get in contact with them and help them to navigate their way through what can be quite a scary, intimidating journey as you start to implement apprentices into your business. So the approach we've taken in Highways England, we see early talent as a vital part of our talent strategy, and my colleague Ted spoke earlier about how early talent is forming part of our talent management process. And I suppose the key here for anyone starting out is that you really do need the input and the buy-in from the people at the top. So the executive team, the board within Highways England are absolutely bought into what we're trying to achieve through our early talent plans. And we do see them as a vital part of the plans we have to grow talent as one of the programmes to support our growth plans. So that's supporting this roads investment strategy and the capability gaps we have into the next roads investment period. I think one of the previous speakers from Hanson spoke about the input that apprentices have. And certainly we see that within our business. During National Apprenticeship Week in March, one of our young lady apprentices shadowed our chief executive for the day and had a really enlightening day attending the sorts of meetings our chief executive attends, and also got the chance to write his blog that week that goes out through our communications portal. Jim actually said to me, and I've got first-hand experience of this through our team, that quite often he'd red pen and change wording that other people have written. And I think he changed one word of Amelia's, one of our young apprentices. So I was so proud of her. And he was really impressed, Jim was, by her insightful questions, her eagerness to learn about his role, and the value she added that day. The other thing that we're obviously considering within Highways England is how we deliver more apprenticeships to deliver on our targets. Now, someone asked us earlier on our stand, have you increased the number of apprenticeships because of the levy? So is it that you're just doing more of them because you've got this pot of money now sitting there? And the answer is no. We've been working on this for a couple of years, and we'd already got buy-in to our apprenticeship plans before the levy hit. fit, because we absolutely see them as playing that really important part in building our talent pipelines and delivering roles for the future into some areas where we struggle to recruit as well. What we've also looked at is how do we identify new ways to use our apprenticeships. So is the ways that we can use them within our graduate programs? Is the skills gaps within our business that apprenticeships can support? And key to this is working with our HR team. So working with them to understand where in our workforce plans are the skills gaps, where are the areas of growth, and how do we input apprenticeships into those areas. So what next for us? I'm, again, really proud that this week we've implemented our first degree apprenticeship. So 8 young people joined us on Monday this week on the Chartered Surveyor pathway. Out of those 8, we had 2 eager young ladies, so that was really good to see again. And they're joining us on a 5-year journey with a view that, again, we'll develop a pipeline of quantity surveyors, which we're absolutely missing within that area at the moment and within that team. And again, our thought is that we'll continue to recruit more into that area so that we can build that pipeline for the future. We're also looking to implement the Leadership and Management Apprenticeship. So the apprenticeship is very much a management development programme. It's already planned. It fits very well with what we're trying to achieve in terms of developing our management capability within highways. So that will be one of our next steps. And I think the point to remember here is that apprenticeships don't have to be for the school leaver that joins you, post 16. Apprenticeships are for everybody. So I was actually saying this to someone earlier. One of our providers told me last week that they've got a 92-year-old signed up to an apprenticeship. I'm not sure how that works, but clearly you need a job to be an apprentice, so they must still be in employment. However, apprenticeships are for everyone. So the Leadership and Management Apprenticeship fits really nicely in your overall training plans to help build management capability and can be offered to middle managers, senior managers, dependent on the level that you opt for. And then just last week, the government approved the Level 7 Accounting Degree Apprenticeship, which is really exciting news. I know the accountancy firms we liaise with have all been waiting for this for some time. And the accounting pathway is absolutely the same as the pathway we already offer to our graduates. We're currently spending over £15,000 on an individual graduate over a 3-year programme. So the accounting apprenticeship will give us an opportunity to fund that through the levy rather than through our training budget. So some learnings for us. We found that the way that we're going to optimise the levy in the best way is by absolutely going back to our talent strategy, understanding where those skills gaps are, and thinking about how do we use some of the new apprenticeships to help us. So those of you in the room that are familiar with standards, you'll know that there's over 100 standards available, and they are built by employers for employers and really do help in some of the more niche areas. Ask for support from providers. I know historically, is there any providers in the room this afternoon? Okay. I was going to talk about you. But no, I think certainly in the past, you can feel like in business that providers are knocking on your door with very much the same provision, and quite often want to deliver what is in their suite of delivery rather than what is actually needed for your business. And so what I've found certainly through the Levy implementation is that providers seem more willing to work with you, to shape programs around what you need for your business, which is a great positive. As I said already, apprenticeships are available to everybody, and from levels 2 to 7. So I heard a great example earlier of a business that is using the Levy to fund their MSc programme, and thinking about how do they deliver development for senior leaders through the apprenticeship programme. For those of you who know a little about the Trailblazer process, that is an opportunity for you as an employer to develop your own qualifications. So looking at the skills gaps you have and developing apprenticeships with other employers in your sector that add real value to your business. And one of the key ones for Highways England is how do we share best practice across our supply chain? So how do we identify providers within our supply chain that need a little bit of help and direction, and how do we support them with some of the knowledge that they need to develop apprenticeships within their business?
The obvious question, though, I guess, is why the take-up hasn't been higher. What other reason? Have you gone out and asked people why they're not sort of applying? What's going on?
Okay, I'll have go, sort of giving some thoughts about that. I think the most important thing to say is, for employers, we're asking you to do something different. So we're asking you to do something you've never really done before, which is really to understand how to make apprenticeships work in your business. I think up till now, we've had a system where providers have been selling into employers. For the most part, that's been free. And I think employers have generally taken that on the basis, look, hey, do you want this training? It's not going to cost you anything. We'll do all the hard work for you. Yeah, go on then. I'll do that. With the Levy, I think we're changing the emphasis really to say to employers, look, think really carefully about how you spend this money. We want you to make smart decisions. As what Charlotte said, we've changed and we're changing the product and the different standards we've actually got. And if you're an employer, you want to make sure you're making smart investment decisions. That takes time. I think there was a bit of scepticism in the run-up to Levy about was it really going to happen? Would it really be introduced? And of course it did, and it has. So I think we're just seeing a natural reaction from employers to do what we want them to do, which is to think carefully, make sure every pound matters, that they invest it wisely, and that will take some time. And that's why when we developed the policy, we introduced what we called a 2-year sunset. So in essence, we're saying, so the money you're paying, you've got 2 years to spend it. So for us, we just want to understand and make sure employers have got all of the right knowledge and skills and capabilities to make those smart decisions. And I'm sure we'll see really good investment decisions happen over time.
Is it a lot of extra red tape, though? Are people looking at it and they just can't just see it as a tax and they can't quite face it? They don't really understand it. Is that a problem, do you think?
I think there's a bit in terms of, depending where you are in the business. Now, what the Levy has done, actually, I think this is, again, good, but a challenge. So, again, if you think about the businesses that generally have engaged with apprenticeships, generally that's been run through HR and through people development divisions of businesses. The Levy becomes a big finance issue. And actually what we've seen is this has gone on to right up the line in companies. It's gone now as a board issue. So you've got CFOs, chief executives, all really big senior people now really interested in the apprenticeship Levy. So I think it's a constant priority for us to make sure we answer all the questions that employers have got. And I think we're probably less in the context of people actually not understanding the Levy now to, okay, how do we make this work smart? How do we make the right decisions? What are all these, what standards about? what's the different products that are there? Which one's right for us? Which provider should we use? Let's go through a tender exercise. Let's put procurement out. So I think they're doing all those things now. So I think for me, it's much less now about people not understanding it. I think we've got a really great service that's simple to use. And I think it's really probably more about helping employers, as I say, get the information and knowledge to make really good decisions.
Now, Charlotte, how user-friendly have you found it, and what have been the big benefits for you?
Yeah, I was going to add to the initial question in that I think there was a preconception by employers that it was going to be really difficult and that it perhaps wasn't going to happen. And actually, the digital account system is extremely easy to use. It's transparent. You can see what's happening. The difficult bit, obviously, is understanding what apprenticeships you want to bring into your business and how you implement those and the work involved. And so, as Keith said, you do need buy-in throughout the organisation, and you need managers that are able to support apprentices and a commitment from everybody to make it work. But actually, the money's sitting there, and I see it as an addition to our training budget and a really positive thing.
It does seem, you look at it from the outside and think, well, why, if I'm going to spend that money, I might as well get something for it, you would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As Keith mentioned earlier, for levy paying employers that don't use all of their pot of money, then it will be taken back. So why would you not want to use it and upskill people across the organisation?
And can I just say, I think we should also remember that whilst we talk a lot about apprenticeships in the media, in the press, that's great, and that's fantastic. But in reality, it's the vast minority of employers that currently engage with apprenticeships. So what this is doing is actually we hope it's making it sort of mainstream in the context of what employers need to think about doing. We hope it makes it much more a driving force for employers to think really hard about how they invest in their workforce, how they bring both talent into the business, but also how they retain good people and retrain people. But we're working to try to increase the number of apprentices, and that means a significant increase in the number of workplaces that currently experience apprenticeships. So all of that's going to take time.
Did someone want to give a personal experience? I'd understand if you didn't, but that's fine. No, don't worry. You're talking about what an apprentice can be as well. It does have connotations, that word, doesn't it? Is there a bit of an image issue with it? People assume it is a 16-year-old who perhaps just doesn't want to go to university, and actually it's much broader than that?
I, from an employer perspective, think that there is work to do. Certainly, in our business, the word apprentice does conjure up a certain image, and we're doing work to try and dismiss that and get people to understand that the development we can offer them just happens to be through an apprenticeship model, but actually you can access up to level 7 management development, accountancy, whatever else it might be. So I think there's work for both employers, the ESFA, to do to dispel that myth.
Can I just say one thing on that? I mean, what I would say is, for me, sort of working around policy, is I think we've made a change that you see very rarely. And I think we're seeing a generational sort of shift in what people really perceive apprenticeships to be. And that's going to happen because the work that Charlotte's been talking about in terms of getting employers owning the products now.
Yeah.
So that, as they start to drive what an apprenticeship is, they start to demand what they want from the apprenticeship system and the apprenticeship training. I think that's going to make a huge change in what we all think and perceive about an apprenticeship. So it's no longer about us trying to sell something to employers they don't really want. It's actually about employers kind of demanding now what they need. And we've got our challenge is to develop a system that can respond and support that. But I think it's a really exciting time. And hopefully in the next sort of few years, we're going to be talking about apprenticeships very differently than what we've been talking about them in the past.
Is the sell to employers, or is it also to the people who might want an apprenticeship, might want to retrain, maybe not 92-year-olds, I don't know, but to the general public as well, that kind of sell?
That's really important too, you know, and that's part of the messaging. But I think what's really important is the center. You know, the center of this has to be the business and the employer, because you know we've got to get it right in the context of an apprenticeship needs to be a job. It needs to be about adding value into the business, that in turn is adding value into the economy, which is adding value to the productivity, which in turn adds value to things like wages and wage growth and those sorts of things. When we start getting those things right, I think it's absolutely right then that more young people will want to demand to be apprentices and drive apprenticeship opportunities. And we also hope, as Charlotte said, there'll be an important place for anyone in the workplace that are facing sort of a reskilling or a retraining need, maybe because of redundancy, maybe because there's a change in the context of where the business is going. All of those things can be supported through a really good apprenticeship.
Guys, thank you very much for your time. Well done. See you on.